Welcome everybody to episode 3 of the Trevor Airdrie Show. I am your host, Trevor Airdrie. The show is seen every single Wednesday at MMAJam.ca. Tell your friends, tell your family to check it out. Last week, guys, over 5,000 of you tuned in to watch. Can't thank you guys enough. It was greatly appreciated. And without any further talking, on to the rundown. The rundown is sponsored by Fear the Fighter Training Academy, located at 512 Charles Street East in Kitchener, Ontario. If you want to be the best, train with the best, go down and see Chad and Kyle today. They train wrestling, they train Muay Thai, Taekwondo, you name it, they train it. If you want any other information, go to fearthefightertrainingacademy.com. Well, this past weekend we had UFC 159. It was headlined by John Bones versus Chael Sonnen for the UFC light heavyweight title. It was a very weird card. And like a lot of the fights, 2 technical decisions, which was unheard of before this event, and so forth. So the main event had a David versus Goliath type of match. It was Chael Sonnen challenging Jon Jones for the UFC light heavyweight championship, like I said. It was Jon Jones using Chael Sonnen's game plan to beat Chael Sonnen. It was very interesting, and if the fight lasted 30 seconds longer, we would have had a new UFC champion in Chael Sonnen. No doctor in their right mind would have cleared Jon Jones to make it into the second round. That toe was gross. It almost made me actually throw up. It was that disgusting. Where I'd like to see these two guys go next is I'd like to see Jon Jones face the winner of Lyoto Machida versus Alex Gustafsson, which looks to be sewn up after Machida called out Gustafsson on the weekend. But Jon Jones is probably about a good 9 months to a year away from fighting again. And then Chael Sonnen, he's been calling out Vanderlei by the looks of things on Twitter, so it looks that it's going to be Chael Sonnen versus Vanderlei next. In the co-main event, you had Michael Bisping versus Alan Belcher. This is one of those eye poke fights. This fight, I didn't have a problem with. It ended with an eye poke that went to the judging for a technical decision. The judging in this fight, it wasn't going to change. It was 10 seconds left to go in the final round. Michael Bisping was handedly beating Alan Belcher with a hideous-looking Johnny Cash tattoo. If anybody was wondering what that tattoo was, it is supposed to be Johnny Cash. Bisping, continues to tear over the guys, arguably in the top 10. It wasn't like it was a very interesting fight for me. If Bisping lost, okay, Belcher, pushes himself further, but Bisping really had nothing to win from this fight. And then before that, Roy Nelson versus Czech Congo. Love the knockout by Roy Nelson. Love the belly rub. I can't get enough of Roy Nelson. I'm very intrigued to see if he takes the fight with Daniel Cormier, or if Mark Hunt does lose to JDS in the next coming card in May there. That could be another intriguing fight. You have 2 knockout specialists. But like I said last week, with Roy Nelson and Czech Congo, is 2 guys are going to enter the cage. One of them's going to take a nap, and it was Czech Congo on the losing end of that side. Previous to that, we had a very boring fight. Well, I found it very boring. It was Phil Davis versus Vinny Magalhaes. I always pronounce that name wrong. I do apologize. It was a unanimous decision, 30-27, 30-27, 29-28 for Phil Davis. The wrestler always beats the submission guy, as it seems as of late. Wrestling is very overused in the UFC, but they keep beating the submission guys. Like, look at Daniel Cormier versus Frank Mir. Look at the wrestling Jon Jones used in the main event versus Chael Sonnen. It's a very key thing to have in mixed martial arts today. And Phil Davis used it to his advantage and used the jab. It was ridiculous how many jabs that Phil Davis used. So it was a very boring fight. Phil Davis does push himself into probably a top 10 opponent next, which should be very interesting. Now, before that, we had what I called the fight of the night last week. What I figured was going to be an incredible tilt. Could put itself up there in the fight of the year candidates. Pat Healy versus Jim Miller in the lightweight division. It was an incredible bout. They went back and forth. If the first round lasted 10 seconds longer, Jim Miller would have finished Pat Healy, and the match would have been over, and the fans probably would have been just as happy. Jim Miller, fighting in New Jersey, did have the crowd support, but Bam Bam Healy, he delivered. It was an incredible match. Ended rear naked choke, round 3, 4:02. Earned fight of the night. It earned submission of the night. It was just an incredible fight. If you haven't watched the card from this past weekend, I do recommend, if you can only watch one match, to watch Pat Healy versus Jim Miller. Arguably, a win over Jim Miller puts an unranked Pat Healy into the top 10 of the UFC standings, so he's definitely going to be one of those guys to watch out for, and he's got a granite chin if you haven't watched any of his past fights. So he's going to be very tough in that lightweight division. Now on to the undercard. I'll just do the quick results of the undercard. You had Khabilov over Medeiros via TKO injury, badly broken thumb. You had Sarah McCann over Sheila Gaff by TKO via punching. You had Brian Caraway, who I find is the luckiest man in the UFC for dating Miesha Tate, over Johnny Bedford, which never should have happened because Bedford had the full training camp, even though it was for a different opponent. Cody McKenzie over Leonard Garcia by unanimous decision. And Steven Styler started out the night by beating Kurt Holloway by unanimous decision as well. The morning of the card, you did have Nick Catone versus James Head canceled due to Catone having trouble making weight, and he had to be taken to the hospital for dehydration. So, fight of the night announced at the post-fight conference. You had Pat Healy versus Jim Miller as the fight of the night, which, no questions asked, that's a no-brainer. You had knockout of the night, Roy Nelson once again, no questions asked, that's a no-brainer as well. And then submission of the night, Pat Healy. And once again, I completely agree with all three of those bonuses. $65,000 for each, so Pat Healy walks away with a cool $130,000. Just incredible money that Pat Healy won in his first UFC fight in, I believe, something like 9 years. So up next, Outside the Cage, sponsored by M&A Sports Media. A lot of stuff going on with M&A Sports Media, so check them out on Facebook. M&A Sports Media, type it into a search engine, and check out all the big news that's coming up for them. So, on Outside the Cage, Frankie Edgar, May 23rd, you got this right here. $25 for a meet and greet, Molly Blooms in Kitchener. $30 at the door. It's located at 10 Manitou Drive in Kitchener. Great bar, great people, and go see the former UFC lightweight champion of the world, Frankie Edgar. Also on tap, coming up, we have the Sean Tompkins Memorial Golf Tournament. It's the second annual one. To early registration, it's $125. In 2 weeks' time, there will be an online registration for it. Currently, you can go to Adrenaline Training Center to get more information. It'll be a really fun day. Mark Hominick will be there. Sam Stout will be there. Chris Hordesky will be there. Joe Ferrero from UFC on Sportsnet will be there. The event itself is going to be at the Fire Rock Golf Club in London there. So go ahead and check them out at adrenalinetrainingcenter.com. If you want to know like the who's who of MMA, like Sean Tompkins trained it. He trained everybody from Bas Rutten, Clay Guida, Vitor Belfort, you name it, he trained it. He had a very large repertoire of fighters, and you include even like the guys that still train there: Mark Hominick, Sam Stout, Chris Hordesky, Chris Clements, who had the 2-second knockout. Guaranteed, you should check it out online on YouTube. There, it's incredible. He just runs into his fist and it's over. So we have that coming up as well. So definitely check out those two events. You got to build the MMA community somehow, and the only way you can do it is by going to these events. So without further ado, I will debut a new segment on this show, a new segment. There is no upcoming UFC this weekend, so I gotta fill the time somehow, and I'm going to debut Trevor's Corner. This is where I'm going to pick a topic and I'm going to debate the pros and the cons of this topic. If you want to be a part of this, send me a question, send me your argument. It could be on Twitter at the Trevor A Show. It could be via email, trevorairdrieshow@gmail.com. It could be any numerous ways. You want to be a part of the show? I will debate anything for you guys. So this week I picked the topic. Trevor's Corner is sponsored by combinationsports.com, your one-stop shop for all your MMA and boxing apparel and gear. So check out combosports.com. They have a lot of great stuff on clearance right now. Or you can go to 306 King Street in Kitchener, Ontario, and meet Elroy there, and he'll hook you up with all the gear and clothing you'll need to fight. So the topic of this week is super fights. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Dana White touched on it in the post-fight of UFC 159, the conference there. He said Anderson Silva made him a call during the fight saying he wanted one of the super fights. While Anderson Silva should, keep his P's and Q's right now, he does have to get through a very dangerous Chris Weidman, who is a great wrestler, great striker. And if we saw Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, Chris Weidman has way better wrestling than Chael Sonnen, so it'll be interesting to see if he can actually get by that task. With that being said, if he does get by the task, we'll play the if game. George St-Pierre has already said, no, I'm fighting Johnny Hendricks. After Johnny Hendricks, the list goes on and on. You could throw in a Jake Ellenberger. You could throw in a Tariq Safadine. You can throw in... The names go on and on and on. The UFC just acquired over 100 fighters from Strikeforce. So it's not that there's like a lack of challenges for George St-Pierre. And quite frankly, he doesn't need to fight Anderson Silva. It's not a fight that makes much sense. Now, on the other end of the foot, Anderson Silva versus John Bones. Very intriguing. Anderson Silva has fought numerous times in the light heavyweight division. Obviously, it would be Anderson Silva jumping up, not John Bones jumping down. You can end the argument between Anderson Silva and John Jones. Now, going back to the St-Pierre side of things, St-Pierre versus Anderson Silva would be a career ender for both, because that's the only way that fight can go on. There's no way that these guys continue. There's no big fight left for Anderson or George St-Pierre after a fight like this. There's no, there's nothing. That's top of the hill. And what's the UFC going to do to top it? Like, you have UFC 200 coming up in the next few years. You have the 25th anniversary coming up in the next few years. You have numerous cards, like if you do Cowboy Stadium, if you do the Brazil Soccer Center one, if you want to do the Rogers Center again in Toronto. There's nothing that you could top that fight with. That would be the biggest fight of all time. And in retrospect, I think you'd kind of kill the sport. GSP and Anderson Silva would get more money out of that fight than they would ever need again, and they would never achieve that payday again. So I completely wash out the whole GSP Anderson Silva. It's just a dream fight that makes no sense. For a one payday, that's a lot to bank on one payday, because there is no fight that could beat that fight. Now on to John Jones and Anderson Silva. Very intriguing. It's not a career ender unless John Bones beats Anderson Silva. If John Bones did beat Anderson Silva, I believe Anderson Silva would hang it up, but you'd have John Bones, who would be the unstoppable force, and it's just the promotion behind that fight. It kind of makes sense, but at the same time, there's a lot of challenges that John Bones hasn't climbed over yet. Anderson Silva, that division, Chris Weidman, Mark Munoz comes to mind, but the division is pretty cleared out, and it seems like anybody in the middleweight division that starts climbing the ladder, then they all of a sudden just fall off the face of the earth, and nobody gives them credibility against Anderson Silva. So, to me, keep the divisions separate. Don't start these super fights, because I think at the end of the day, it would kill the sport based on where do you go from there? How can you top it? Like, yeah, you can build a next Anderson Silva or another John Bones Jones, but you're killing legacies by putting these guys together. So, like, I'm in the corner of I am firmly against the super fights, but we'll see what happens. Like, I'll definitely be ordering on pay-per-view if they do put one of these super fights together, because it is a very intriguing matchup. But I would find it really hard to keep buying the pay-per-views, because I always buy pay-per-view based on, well, what's this one going to do to top it? What's this one going to do to top it? Well, that would be the top of the mountain. So there's only one way to go down from the top of the mountain, and that's downhill. So I disagree with that, but we'll see what happens. And so that's the end of the show this week, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I'm not sure if I will be doing a show next week, as next Wednesday is my birthday, so I don't know if I'll be doing a show next Wednesday. I'll probably end up doing it just because I enjoy talking to you guys. And until next time, dream it, believe it, achieve it. Like our sponsors, M&A Sports Media, Fear the Fighter Training Academy, and combosports.com. And of course, check out MMAJam.ca daily for your news. And take her easy, guys.